All right, if you are tackling the CCIE Enterprise Infrastructure Lab, you know that every single detail counts. But there's one detail that can literally make or break your entire prep: the exact software versions you're using. So today we're going to cut right through all that confusion and give you the definitive version guide that will get your lab perfectly in sync with the real exam. Let's dive in.
And look, let's get one thing straight right out of the gate. This isn't just a friendly suggestion, it's a hard and fast rule. Using the wrong software version means that your practice labs, all those demos you're building, and even your troubleshooting muscle memory, well, it all might be completely useless when you sit for the real thing. You could literally be practicing for failure and not even know it.
So where do we even begin? Well, you got to start with the foundation, right? The bedrock of your entire lab environment, the core router and switch operating systems. Getting these right is absolutely the first and, I'd say, most critical step to building a lab that's an accurate mirror of the real CCIE exam.
Okay, so let's get specific here. For your routers and switches, anything running IOSv, you have got to be on the 17.9.x train. Now, why that one? Simple. It's a long-term support release, which means you get stable, predictable behavior for all the big stuff, like BGP and OSPF. Plus, it fully supports the automation tools you're going to get tested on. Then, for your data center gear, NXOS 93.x is the key. This version gives you the VPC and VXLAN features you need, and, maybe most importantly, a CLI that is going to be consistent with what you see on exam day.
Okay, we've got the foundation down, but let's talk about the big one, the number one pitfall. If there's one single area where a version mismatch is going to cause a total, catastrophic meltdown in your prep, where do you think it is? And the answer is right here: software-defined infrastructure. This is where networking is at today, and it's also where things get super sensitive with versions. Even a tiny mismatch in your SD access or your SD-WAN components can mean missing features, totally different API behaviors, and ultimately, failed lab tasks.
For SD access, the magic number is DNA Center version 2.3.5.x. And look, the key thing to get here is that it's not about having any version of DNA. It's about having this specific version. It's the one that aligns perfectly with the fabric workflows, the policy segmentation, and especially the assurance and API behaviors that are actively being tested. If you use an earlier version, you are going to be missing key features you're expected to configure. Simple as that.
Now let's jump over to SD-WAN and see how this all connects. You've got to have the whole controller suite. That's your vManage, vBond, and vSmart running on the 20.9.x release. This is what guarantees the policy framework is stable and that any API calls you make will behave exactly like the exam expects. And notice the WAN edge devices? They bring it right back to our foundational OS, IOSv 17.9.x. It just shows you how important that core version consistency really is.
Yeah, and of course the exam isn't just about all the fancy software-defined stuff. Classic WAN technologies are still a massive part of the blueprint. And here too, version consistency is the name of the game if you want predictable, gradable behavior. And would you look at that? Here it is again, IOSv 17.9.x. Doesn't matter if you're configuring complex DMVPN phases or MPLS L3 VPNs, running on this version is what ensures that the control plane behavior, think NHRP for example, matches the lab's automated grading logic. If your output doesn't match what that grading script expects, you don't get the points. It is that simple. All right, let's talk about the part of the exam that really separates the classic network engineer from the modern CCIE: automation and programmability. This stuff isn't just a nice-to-have anymore. It is a core competency, and your tools have to be set up just right. So let's just walk through the stack piece by piece. It all starts with a modern version of Python. We're talking 3.8 or higher. You'll be running this from the guest shell, which is available on, you guessed it, IOSv 17.9.x. From there, you'll be talking to the device using REST and netconf APIs, and you'll be passing data back and forth primarily in JSON format. You see, each layer builds on the one before it. And listen, this is a huge warning, okay? When you are practicing, you have to be using real live API interactions. Mock scripts or just, reading about how APIs work, that's not going to cut it. The exam is going to test your ability to write actual, functional code that interacts with a live network. Your prep has to mirror that reality.
Okay, so you're probably thinking, how on earth do I build a lab with all these specific versions without breaking the bank on hardware? Well, the answer is virtualization. Let's take a look at the platforms that make this whole thing possible. So,
Whether you're a fan of EVNG Pro or you prefer to stick with Cisco's own CML2, the game plan is the same. The images you need are the exact ones we've been talking about this whole time: IOSXE 17.9.x, NXOS 9.3.x, and that SD-WAN 20.9.x suite. These platforms let you build out complex, repeatable scenarios for both practice and troubleshooting, giving you that critical hands-on time with the right software.
So let's bring it all home. Why did we just spend all this time obsessing over these version numbers? Well, first, it makes your practice directly exam relevant, so your time isn't wasted. Second, it makes sure your skills are being built on a technically accurate foundation. And third, it means you're preparing with trusted, industry-standard information that lines up perfectly with what the CCIE is all about.
Let me just leave you with this one last thought. The CCIE lab is one of the most demanding technical exams on the planet. It is unbelievably strict, and the only way you're going to meet that standard is to make sure that your preparation, starting with your software versions, is even stricter.